Wharton from the canon of postmodern feminism as a consequence of the temporal and historical localization of postmodernism and feminism. Indeed, critics have long regarded her 1920 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Age of Innocence, as a pre-feminist and realist text. My study attempts to modernize prevalent conventions by reclaiming Wharton as a postmodern and feminist author. I examine the manner in which she employs the materiality of fashion and regimes of discourse surrounding it to produce cultures of femininity, specifically that of the protagonist Ellen Olenska in the novel. In doing so, my analysis establishes the text as a work of historiographic metafiction, a postmodern genre of reflexive fiction concerned with the writing of history. Here, reflexive indicates self-regarding, but not necessarily self-conscious fiction. The Age of Innocence is most often described as a novel of manners, a story that presents the social conventions of a particular class in a distinct time and place, invariably positing a character's personal ambitions against the establishment. This represents a fair description of Wharton's novel, as the reader accesses the narrative through the vantage point of Newland Archer, who struggles to negotiate his desires within the prevailing societal context. However, the story's structure reveals a more complex underpinning introduced through the figure of the heroine, Ellen Olenska. Further, Wharton employs the fashion apparatus to construct and represent Ellen's femininity, that is, her gendered and styled identity, so that it subverts the very conventions that the narrative appears to uphold in a self-reflexive and metafictional manner. The styled identity can be understood as a form of selfhood that is both materially and discursively produced through fashion. I will now elaborate on the metafictional logic in The Age of Innocence. I begin by providing a brief context for Ellen's narrative. Orphaned at a young age and raised by a nomadic aunt, Ellen grows up in a world saturated with bohemian influences, one that shares nothing in common with her privileged relatives in conservative, Gilded Age New York society. I will hereafter refer to it as Old New York. After Ellen's marriage collapses, she returns to New York, where she hopes to seek solace in her family's company. However, Old New York finds her disregard for convention and bold sensuality too transgressive to accept, and she eventually returns to an independent life in Paris. Ellen's affinity for Europe is reminiscent of Wharton's own Francophilia. Wharton articulated her lifelong admiration for French culture in her 1919 collection of essays, French Ways and Their Meaning. In the article titled The New French Woman, she compares the naive American woman with the more liberal and culturally sophisticated French woman. It is evident that Wharton's New French Woman is based on her personal predisposition and further predicts the construction of Ellen. As a consequence of this intimate relationship between the author and her heroine, I argued that the underlying narrative message of Ellen's alienation from New York society is a conscious reference to Wharton, and is therefore an example of metafiction in the novel. In this section, I will offer further evidence for the novel's reflexive nature by describing Wharton's use of metafiction in Ellen's construction. The novel opens at an operatic performance of Faust in the Haute Monde Academy of Art, where Ellen's arrival shocks the audience. The men and women in attendance condemn her, for they find such public parading of a woman estranged from her husband as improper and irreverent. In addition, Ellen's choice of dress exacerbates her scandalous appearance at the opera. Wharton dresses Ellen in a diamond headdress and a dark blue velvet directoire-style gown, that is, theatrically caught up under her bosom by a girdle with a large clasp. Catherine Josselin explains that Ellen's gown is modeled after the directoire era in French political history, when it first gained popularity through the patronage of Empress Josephine, Napoleon Bonaparte's wife. This neoclassical Greco-Roman inspired design was made with loosely flowing, soft and luxurious fabrics, so that the dress gathered below the bosom rather than the waist. In doing so, it allowed freer movement, while also accentuating the chest in a sexually provocative manner. In the early 20th century, the French couturier Paul Poiret revived the directoire-style gown in his women's dress designs. He called it the 1811 gown, advertising it as the apparel for the modern, independent, and stylish woman. Thus, this Josephine look was popular both in the early 19th and 20th centuries, and was not worn by American women or Parisians in the 1870s. Consequently, Ellen's velvet Josephine gown is retro vogue and also avant-garde, as she both adopts and predicts French style. This anachronistic dress serves as reflexive reinforcement of literary artifice, which dramatizes and asserts the presence of the author as artist. Moreover, a certain level of diegetic self-consciousness with regards to the gown's peculiarity is invoked in Ellen's assertion that her dress was not smart enough for the Beaufort's annual ball following the opera. Signifying deviance through the fashion apparatus. Throughout the novel, Wharton emphasizes Ellen's unconventional clothing fashions to establish the latter as an outsider to old New York. In donning shocking crimson merino as a child, or wrapping several rows of amber beads around her neck as an adult, Ellen's personal style never conforms to New York's dictates of taste. Upon a visit to the Archers, Ellen dresses in a puffed and draped polonaise skirt, which is a French haute couture design popularized by Marie Antoinette in the 18th century. She pairs it with a black velvet jacket styled to look like a man's cavalry jacket. Her outfit is therefore retro chic and transgressive for its avant-garde appropriation of menswear designs. It serves as another literary device that reveals the author as artist and is an example of metafictionality within the text. Wharton's use of fashion in the material and discursive production of Ellen's femininity, that is, her gendered, styled, and sexualized body and identity, is pertinent. Gilles Lipovetsky writes, "Avant-garde fashion can only be respected in a society that concedes individual agency to its citizens, agency to change the way they organize the world, modify values and customs, and alter the definition of aesthetics. Such individual autonomy is absent in old New York, a world that privileges conformity over creativity and innovation. Consequently, the highly individualistic fashion system is incompatible with old New York, and it serves as an effective device in demonstrating Ellen's estrangement from the latter." In the previous section, I described metafictional elements in Ellen's construction. I will now discuss metafiction in Wharton's representation of Ellen. Wharton's representation of Ellen, or the manner in which old New York perceives her, unveils the latter's omnipresent and disciplinary male gaze. Both the male and female citizens of old New York participate in its system of doxification, a term coined by Linda Hutcheon to denote the institutional normalization of social behavior. On the one hand, Archer is shocked and troubled by the way Ellen's opera gown revealed more shoulder and bosom than old New York was accustomed to. And on the other hand, his sister ridicules Ellen's gown as perfectly plain and flat, like a nightgown. Archer's mother pronounces the final judgment on the eccentric outfit by invoking the memory of Ellen's black satin debutante dress, declaring, "What can you expect of such a girl?" Therefore, the materiality of Ellen's clothing and accessories entwines with the discourse surrounding it to establish her brand of femininity as deviant. Old New York's collective construct of Ellen's gypsy-like persona is further complicated by her adult sensuality. In addition to viewing her as eccentric, the novel's prominent male characters also find her sexually arousing. Newland Archer's growing desire for Ellen is most relevant here. We witness his voyeuristic spectatorship of Ellen's body when he visits her one evening. He is immediately surprised by Ellen's unconventional attire. Her long robe of red velvet, bordered about the chin with glossy black fur, appears shockingly unlike the simple dinner dress that New York women usually wore while receiving evening visitors. He is titillated by the unusual contrast of her fur-covered throat with her bare arms in the heated drawing room, finding the exhibition before him undeniably pleasing. The narrative exposes old New York's sexual political hierarchy and its monopolistic division of visual pleasure into active male and passive female. As a consequence, the man is afforded the power to substitute his eyes as phallus and deterministically gaze at the woman whose appearance is reduced to a spectacle coded for strong visual and erotic impact. In the longer version of my paper, I deconstruct Archer's erotic desire for Ellen that is realized through his fetishization of her ungloved hands. To sum up my presentation, I offer a final word. Edith Wharton's material and discursive creation of Olenska's transgressive femininity through fashion draws attention to the author as artist and thus displays implicit narrative reflexivity. The intra- and extra-diegetic referential relationship between Ellen and Wharton further evidences the novel's self-regarding or metafictional nature. Invoking Linda Hutchins' statement that metafiction is a recognizable manifestation of literary postmodernism, I conclude that The Age of Innocence represents a work of historiographic metafiction that evokes a postmodern ethos in its production of femininity through fashion. Thank you.